Hello there, GCSEers, and today we're going to explore the question, how does Jesus' life, death and resurrection affect Christians today? Now for Christians, the life and death and resurrection of Jesus are remembered in many ways. They remember them at particular festivals. Certainly you'll see the Christmas cards with Jesus' birth on them, and that's important for Christians. They remember his birth, but also his death and resurrection at Easter. They remember on Good Friday Jesus' death, and on Easter Sunday Jesus' resurrection. And they celebrate those in different ways. Different denominations celebrate them differently. But also everyday Christians use the stories about Jesus' life and Jesus' death and resurrection in their prayer, in their personal worship. And they reflect on these stories of Jesus. And we're going to really look at that in much more detail in the next unit, what actually Christians do on a day-to-day basis and how they reflect on the life and death of Jesus and bring it into their own lives. Now, the crucifixion is particularly important for Christians today because many Christians, as you know, or you may know, wear a crucifix. Now, the crucifix has a depiction of Jesus' body on the cross, just like you see in the picture here. And they use this to remember the important event and the sacrifice that Jesus made. Remember, they believed that the sacrifice that Jesus made was particularly important for them and means that they can also defeat death and go to heaven. Now, it also teaches them about forgiveness. Now, if you remember Jesus' words on the cross, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." But also, he forgives the criminal as he's being crucified. So Christians use the crucifix to remind them of actually what's going to happen, about how Jesus forgives them for their sins, or how God forgives them for their sins. And the crucifixion also reminds them that suffering is a part of life, that indeed they will enter suffering. A famous pope who died, Pope John Paul II, he went through a very, very bad disease before he actually died, but he didn't shy away and leave. He actually said that part of his suffering was to show people that we must accept, just as Jesus accepted suffering, as Christ accepted suffering on the cross, so must human beings. Now, that's one side of it, people who remember particularly the death of Jesus, but many Christians also remember the resurrection. And instead of wearing a crucifix, many wear a plain cross to show how Jesus defeats death and rises from the dead. It shows them the defeat of evil and gives them hope that it will happen to them in the future. So Jesus' resurrection is remembered in the actual empty cross, the cross that many Christians wear all over the world. Now, just as Jesus forgave the sins of the criminal and those who crucified him, Christians believe that their sins will also be forgiven and they will go to heaven. So Christians ultimately remember this because of Jesus' particularly death and resurrection. They believe that they will go to heaven, and the symbols that they use and the festivals that they have and their own personal prayer are part of that. Now, Christians really believe that without the resurrection there would be no Christian faith. Jesus has to defeat death. He has to really do what Adam couldn't do and obey God completely so they can go to heaven. And Jesus is able to forgive their sins, and so therefore they believe that they will go to heaven too. Now, this belief affects how Christians live their lives. For example, Roman Catholics believe that you should lead a good life, and by leading a good life you will go to heaven. Now, we may have looked at the parable of the sheep and the goats, and you remember this picture, where good people and bad people are split at the end of time. Now, we're going to go really into this next unit, in our next unit of study, but here it's very important that particular Christians believe that by living a good life they will go to heaven. So they feed the hungry, they give water to the thirsty, they help the sick, they take care of them, they go visit people in prison, and they help the stranger. And we're going to look at how they actually do that, as I say, in the next unit. But Jesus' death and resurrection affects Christians' actions, giving them hope after death, and by helping others here on earth they believe that they will go to heaven. Now, other Christians believe that faith in Jesus' life and death and resurrection is enough. It will lead people to do good works, but the faith is the important thing. They believe that faith in Jesus, that he is in his death, and particularly in the most important event. Remember, there would be no Christian faith if Christians believe Jesus didn't rise from the dead. So faith in those things, faith in that, will actually enable them to go to heaven. So Jesus' life, death and resurrection affect Christians today mostly because it affects their actions and it affects how they treat other people, and they believe because Jesus defeated death and is able to go in, he went to heaven and then resurrected 3 days later, then Christians today believe that if they do good works or just have faith in those particular events, then that will happen for them.